5:31. I'll call this meeting to order of the Lansing City Council Committee of the Whole. Ask that the clerk please call the roll.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Present, participating remotely from Lansing, Michigan.
Councilmember Hussein.
President, participating remotely from South Lansing, Michigan.
Councilmember Wood.
I'm here. I'm present, participating remotely from Lansing, Michigan.
Councilmember Spitzley.
I'm present, participating remotely from Lansing, Michigan.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Present, participating from South Lansing.
Councilmember Garza.
Present, participating remotely from South Lansing, Michigan.
Councilmember Jackson.
Present, participating remotely from Lansing, Michigan.
And Councilmember Beck.
Present, participating remotely from Lansing, Michigan.
All members are present.
Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda, is a set of minutes from May 3rd and May 8th. Mr. Vice President.
Sure. I did have an opportunity to take a look at these. I didn't see anything wrong with them, so I'll move the meeting minutes from May 3rd and May 8th as presented.
All right, any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on both sets together?
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Beck.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
And Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Motion's carried 8-0.
All right. First item on our agenda is public comment on agenda items. So those members of the public wishing to speak, you will have 3 minutes to do so. As is typical with council practice, we will not respond to public comment. And I ask that you keep your remarks cordial and adhere to city council rules and decorum. To speak, please raise your virtual hand by pressing Option Y on a Mac, Alt Y on a PC, or *9 on your telephone device. I see no hands up. So I'm gonna, told me in lobbying when you got the votes shut up, so I'm gonna move on. So we are gonna move on to our first presentation this evening. Is from our Chief Strategy Officer, Judy. I really thank you for your flexibility in being here this evening. I know we had some back and forth on scheduling and it worked out well. So I'm glad you could be here tonight. It's a beautiful night. So we're all here ready to pay close attention. I know when we spoke back in January or so, the discussion was how we can bring in the work that you're doing that's important to the city into the frame and context of our decision making around the final adoption of the budget. So thank you for being here, and I will leave the floor to you.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm glad to be here as well. And Peter, President Spatafor, excuse me. Tonight I have an update on Opeb. I also have some discussion items concerning long-term projections. And then also just a couple other items concerning long-term with the city. So I will start with Opeb. And I'd like to share my screen if I could. Sherry, do I have that capability right now?
You should,
Yep,
yes.
every panelist should be set to share their screen.
Okay, I'm gonna take you to the beginning.
Hey, it's
We are
working.
seeing it.
Yay. Yep. All right, so I'm going to, part of my screen's cut off, so I'm going to drop you all down if it will let me. There we go. All right. Can you still hear me and see me?
We can hear you and see you and your screen too.
Okay, great. Okay, so I will start with my first slide. And again, I'd like to start with Opeb because that was another item that we talked about, me bringing you up to date on back in January when we talked about the budget. I'm sorry, I heard a lot of screeching.
Yeah, there someone had an open mic, I closed it.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so what I'd like to do is start out talking a little bit about where we began when I took this role 9 months ago. So in 2019, the Opeb liability was at 736.6 million. And as you all are aware, we went through a process to get to the point where we are. But since that time, January 2020, we received the updated Opeb report. And according to the report, we're now, we're now at 906,951,313 million. But now we have the information from our actuary, and so it's actually 826 million, and I'll walk you through that. But I wanted to start with that piece of information before I went into the information. So I'm not going to read word for word because we all can read here. But what I wanted to do is to carve out a little bit of the history here. And we're going to talk about what the city has done prior to today, and not just this administration, but prior administrations. And in this particular slide, it talks about some of the actions that were taken, you know, reducing benefits and eligibility, working with the unions to try to reduce the healthcare retiree cost. We worked with the actuary, and the actuary updated the mortality tables. And also the second point talks about how the board, and I just want a little side issue. We've been very fortunate because we've had a retirement board that is pretty knowledgeable, very knowledgeable about the investments, and also they make the investments for the retiree healthcare. So we've been very fortunate to have those skilled individuals overseeing the finances. But in 2012, the assumption rate, or the assumed rate of return, was 8.0. And as you'll recall, in some of the Siegel report documents, and then also recommendations from our actuary, we have been adjusting the rate of return, and that will help to reduce the unfunded liability. That's one of the components. So in 2012, it was 8.0, and then down to 7.25 in 2019. And we'll talk about that a little further down the road here because it's a different rate now. And then also some of the other pieces, we've looked at healthcare plan design changes, pension contributions, the health insurance, and all those types of issues or components to try to reduce the unfunded liability. So I'm going to take you at the beginning. I told you about the 2019, the $736 million liability. And so here actually is my rendition of what the 5572 is. And what that is a document that we submit to the Michigan Department of Treasury so that they can tell, you know, look at our pension healthcare accounts. And then also it helps for them to see that we are making progress on our unfunded liability. And that's also something that this process was a new legislative process where we have to submit these every year since we're in the unfunded liability status. So I know that you've all seen this before because I believe as the council, you approved this because it also feeds into the CAP, or the corrective action plan. So as you can see, the top two are the employee retirement system pension, and then the police and fire pension. And then below on the left-hand side, you'll see where it says healthcare, and that's what the OPEB for ERS and police and fire, you'll see across that those are the dollar figures, and the, you know, our assets, our liabilities, and then what is unfunded, and then how much is funded, and then what the actual actuarial determined contribution should be. So that's just a summary. And I'm going to send this to you so that you have this, and I'm sure you'll be having me back because I have an update. I will have an update for you in June. But this is what we look like. This is a snapshot of 2019. So again, 736.6 million. So then I'm going to take you to the next snapshot. And this is for 2020. It's the exact same data, or the exact same format, but different data to reflect where we are. And I mentioned to you, the unfunded liability is 906 million. And it goes through the same format, talking about what the pension assets were, what the liabilities are, and then the unfunded or the excess or the under finance piece. And then what the actuarially determined contributions are. So, you know, the assets minus liabilities shows you what your unfunded liability is, which is 906 million. So then I want to take you to the next slide, which will talk about what are we doing now. So we're negotiating fees and costs with the carriers and looking at carriers to see if we can, recognize cost savings while not necessarily changing the benefits, but trying, staying in alignment with what the agreements were. But we're also looking at how our carriers are charging, how much they're charging. Are we competitive, and all the different costs. So, just basically the cost of the plans. And then also we are rebidding the pharmacy benefit management and some of the other pieces, because as you'll recall, for retirement, and not everyone has the same, because there's different contracts, obviously, but it's the medical, dental, long-term, short-term, vision, dental, and the pharmacy. So those are different pieces that we want to make sure that we remain competitively pricing for our retirees and active employees. And then another piece, I have asked Humana and Blue Cross Blue Shield and PHP to look at what our top ailments are and to develop wellness programs so that we can provide some assistance to employees for, helping them to, if it's a back injury or whatever it may be. We wanted to provide some additional support to help with the employees and retirees to manage their health, as well as obviously if you use the healthcare less, then the cost will go down. So it's a win-win if we can get those types of initiatives in place, which we are working diligently to do. Then we're looking at other ways to decrease benefit management costs. We need to look at personnel. We need to look at how are we handling the customer service? Are we outsourcing it? Do we need to bring it in? So there are other components of that we are looking at. And then another piece of it, plan audits. And I'll give you an example. When I was an HR director at another organization, I inherited a team, and in one of our meetings, we talked about, making sure that our premiums line up with the employees that are still there. So we conducted an audit and discovered that we were paying $90,000 in cost for people that no longer work there. And I'm not saying that the city is doing that, but as far as being good stewards of our funds, we want to make sure that those types of costs are allocated correctly and that we're not paying for something that we're not using, nor are we required to pay for. So those are some of the things. And then looking at, multipliers. And then the next one is decreasing costs through plan design. And this we were able to take advantage of this past year, as you well know. So we moved, instead of having 8 different, I think the Post 65 had like 8 different medical plans, we condensed it down to 1 for Humana, and self-funded PHP, and instituted a couple other tweaks, and we were able to save 3.4 million a year, which that adds up over the course of time, which I'll show you in one of the next slides. And then another piece, as I mentioned to you before, we have a very knowledgeable board, and they're well in tune with understanding how to decrease cost and to stay in alignment with our cap. So the board, they voted to lower the assumed rate of return from 7.25 down to 7%. And that obviously will impact the police and fire and ERS pension, but that's only to the tune of 700,000. And at this point, I'm going to clarify a couple of things, because I know that from some of the past meetings, budget meetings, it was said that it would cost 3 million, but it's not 3 million in police and fire. the $3 million that was quoted actually takes into account that the police and fire and ERS reduced the amortization schedule by 1 year, which again is another form of helping to fund the plan. And it was recommended by our actuary as well as the Siegel report. So we're in alignment with helping to decrease that cost. Also, we updated the mortality tables, and a couple other items. So the changes that the board made are good changes that will put us in a better light to move forward, to help to continue to pay down and to present a more realistic I am stuttering. I think I've had too much coffee, so I'm going to just take a deep breath here. And
Well, Ms. Kaler, how would I give you a second? Councilmember Betts has a question for you, so we'll let you pause and he'll talk, and then you can talk again, and hopefully the coffee's worked itself out by then.
sounds good.
The questions that I was going to ask, I can ask at the end.
Oh, okay.
And we can go now. I'd prefer.
Yeah, if everyone would, there's only about 2 more slides, so let's hold the questions to the end, and then we'll come back to them because I've got a couple.
For
as
sure.
well.
I mean, you know how it is. You raise your hand in a meeting, and it's like, oh, you answered my question on the next slide. So
Exactly.
Thank you for letting me wait.
Well, that was very artful to help Ms. Kaler. She wanted that pause, so here we go. Judy, go ahead.
Taking a deep breath. And I don't know how detailed you all want me to get into this. You know, like Carol has sat on the board for years, so I've been able to talk through some things, and I know the level of detail she likes, but I'm not sure. So if I'm going into too much detail, please tell me and I will revise.
Probably the level of detail somewhere between what Peter likes and what Carol likes. Well, that should be a happy medium.
That's true because I sat on the board with you. Oh, perfect. Thanks. So the next slide, what I did here, so on the left hand where it says ERS prior 1/1/21 and PNF prior 1/1/21 and total prior, what that represents is what our healthcare system for retirees looked like prior to the new change, prior to Humana, prior to PHP. So as you can see, the accrued liability was 436 million. And then the plan assets, 109 million, leaving an unfunded liability of 327 million. So let's move over to the next. The next 3 columns represent our plan after we implemented the Humana change, and also after the actuary implemented those changes. So that's what we really look like today. So if you go over to the first column, the actuarial accrued liability is 356 million. So it went down from 436 million to 356 million. And that's an $80 million decrease in the actuarial accrued liability. It didn't change the plan assets. It didn't have an impact on the plan assets, but it did decrease the unfunded liability, and it reduced the AAL by 6%. And so what the actuarial accrued liability is really the total pension liability, TPL. It's the present value of promised pension benefits or pension obligations, but that's really for the healthcare. So I should have put for the healthcare. So if that makes sense, I'm trying to show you how the plan looked prior to implementing the Humana changeover. So we talked about what did the city do in the past? What are we doing now? Let's talk about next steps. And the next steps in summary are to continue, obviously, to explore different funding design options. And I will hopefully be back next month to talk to you because we're looking at a couple different funding mechanisms that could possibly reduce the unfunded liability by another 100 million. So I can't go into detail yet, and I can't really go into it yet because we need to work through some other steps, but that's something that we are looking at. And then also it was suggested, well, hey, maybe we could look at the enterprise funds to pay for the pension and retiree participants that were working in that department with enterprise funds. And then Peter, I know at one point you had suggested or asked about the Act 35 of 1937, and that's for the Firefighters and Police Officers Retirement Act. And so I looked at that because the first thing that came to mind was, will that be impeded or will that impact the Headley Amendment? And it's not governed by Headley. This is something totally separate. And I did not realize this until I did a little research, but there are several local governments that have actually levied, it's called a 2016 PA 345 millage. Ironwood has a 6.5 mil. The city of Jackson has a 6.33 mil. Madison Heights has a 5.8612 mil. Oak Park has a 6.2017 mil. Redford Township has a 9.45 mil. Sault Ste. Marie has a 5.2115 mil. And the city of Southgate has a 7.42 mil. So there are cities that have actually levied additional mills to pay for the police and fire pension reforms. So that's something else that we could consider, but I did want you to know that I looked at that, and that's something that we may possibly talk about. And so the next step also, and I'm sure that some of you remember that one of the suggestions that I made is that we sit down and talk to people in the community, residents, the union, city employees, city council, administration, the business community, so that we could talk about ways to fund it, ways to reduce expenses, ways to increase revenues, because there are people that have different ideas that are different than ours that very well may help us to make, number one, City Hall more efficient, and number two, there are people from other cities that have moved here that have some great ideas that maybe we could learn from, glean from, try out. So, and I'll go to that next slide, but I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. But I did bring these slides for the ideation meeting just to talk through the process for that. And then there are other ideas that are coming to the forefront that I'm collecting the information. But one of the other ideas that I keep hearing time and time again is why are we holding on to all the different assets that we have, all the land? Can we sell our assets or lease the land and use the proceeds to fund retiree healthcare and other services? And there are a plethora of other suggestions, but I think that it's best to get all the data, all the information together, and then I can compile it into a report where we can go through this and get a better understanding of what additional options are. So in conclusion, the city of Lansing, this is a no-brainer, obviously. We need to implement realistic funding policies and practices to pay down and manage the outstanding pension and retiree healthcare liability. The fact of the matter is that it has not been funded. You know, we've worked with the unions in the past to try to contain the cost, but it needs to be a comprehensive approach because it's a large amount, and we just need to have a plan where we stick to it and we fund it, because basically it hasn't been well funded, and we need to focus and adopt the funding policies and practices and follow them. So I'm going to stop at this point. I do have another piece to this, but I know that I'm not sure if I answered Brandon's, Councilmember Betts's question or not.
Well, I see a quorum of hands raised, so we'll move on to questions, but thank you for your presentation. Thanks for looking at the 435 Act as well. I've been curious about that for a bit, so that's good to know we're not alone in that if we decide to go down that road. So we have a number of council members, and I'm going to call on you in the order in which you raised your hands. First with Councilmember Betts.
Thank you, President Spatafor, and thank you, Ms. Keeler, for being here. I've got a few questions. I'll start with the first, let you answer, and then we can move on to the next one. One thing that I'm interested in very specifically is the trend in our funding ratio. Obviously, the funding ratio should be 100% ideally. I'm just wondering, I guess, if we're trending towards 100% or if we are trending down year to year over the last few years. And then I guess a second question that you can also answer at the same time related to that is what amount of our budget are we allocating directly towards increasing our funding ratio this year? Thank you.
Certainly. So the first piece, I will give you a trend analysis because we're kind of all over the place. And, obviously like back in 2008, when there was a recession, we didn't allocate the full amount, but I will give you an analysis to show you where it has gone. And concerning the amount from our budget, it is 57.5 million, 33.5 will be allocated to the pensions, but that's for both systems. And then OPEB is 24 million.
I guess as a follow-up to that, are the amounts that you just listed, what is going to lead to the increase in our funding ratio, right? So we have a certain proportion that we have to just pay out this year, plus an additional amount of money that will contribute to our funding ratio increasing towards 100%. So I'm wondering if you have that number.
I don't, but I can get that to you.
Okay, that would be great. The other question that I have, and sorry, I know that these are a little bit technical, but I'm trying to, help everybody understand and trying to manage what we should be funding and all that stuff towards OPEB. So I guess my other question for you, is something that's been kind of a concern for me looking at our pensions are spiking and double dipping. Spiking being where somebody works, this happens at the police department where people will work an extra, a lot of overtime in their last couple of years to spike their pension payments. Now I've heard that Mayor Shore has addressed this, so I wanted to hear what's been done about that. And then also double dipping being where a former employee who's receiving a pension goes to another organization and also receives a pension on top of that. This happened with Chief Yankowski, I believe, and I'm wondering if we've done anything since then to kind of address those issues.
Okay, so the spiking pension payments, that's more of a negotiation not issue, but that's something that's negotiated. And Jim, if I'm wrong, please feel free to answer so, but I believe that is something that's negotiated. I see some heads going like that.
Yeah, so that would be just a matter of contract and overtime and things like that. And I know that, Brandon, to your point, I think the mayor's, I won't put words in the mayor's mouth, but it's been mentioned several times around this table that there has been some effort to try and reduce the amount of reliance on overtime and moving more on full-time work rather than overtime. And if I'm wrong, someone will correct me, I'm sure, but that's what I've heard.
Collective bargaining, yes.
Collective bargaining, okay. All right, thank you. And then regarding the double dipping of pension, that's not anything I think that we have control over. But I mean, I hear you. I mean, I think that is something that's important. One thing that we did do though, that I think is important too, is if there are two spouses that have retired, then, there's not separate, it's more efficiently managed so that we're not double dipping. So those are some of the things that we've looked at and have changed. Any other questions?
Nope, those are it. And I'm sorry, I come with technical questions all the time. So I appreciate you answering the questions and for getting back to me later on the other information. So thank you. Thank you, President Spatafor. That's all I've got.
Councilmember Betts, thank you. Next up is Councilmember Spitzley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I have some follow-up questions to Councilmember Betts. So regarding the percent funded for our OPEB, is there a best practice percentage that we need to aspire to? I know that, in our perfect world, it'd be 100% funded, right? But what would be a percent best practice?
Okay, that's a great question because there's a couple things we're looking at. As you all know, we have to submit the 5572 because we are underfunded. And so for the pension, 60% and above, with healthcare, 40% and above, then we would not have to submit those documents to the state. We would be considered, funded, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's our first threshold that we're trying to get to. Another piece of the puzzle that we're looking at, and by the way, I have to say that our actuary is amazing. He's been very helpful. We're having some discussions to figure out when will we be able to pay benefits out of the trust. So we're looking at funding and ways to do that. So there's a lot out there there are a lot of alternatives, I believe, that are out there. So to get to your point, some of the best practices, and I'm glad you asked this because one of the things I thought about is the fact that our contemporaries are Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Southfield, I believe there's like 4, and Warren, 4 who are doing very well. So I would like to start a benchmarking with them, to see where do we stand, because I know as it stands now, we are not performing as well as they are, but we could use them as a standard because they are within our bandwidth. They have pretty much the same population and some of the same policies that we have in place.
So following up on that, and you talked about millages for the OPEB, and you mentioned some communities that have these millages in place. So if we're talking apples and apples, what about the communities that are comparable? Does Ann Arbor have one? Does Southfield have one? That, and so that would kind of give us, no.
They don't. No, that's a good question. I thought about that when you were talking. It's Ironwood, Jackson, Madison Heights, Oak Park, Redford Township, Sault Ste. Marie, and Southgate.
Okay. Do you have any idea of what we'd be looking at and what we would be able to generate to help us with that? I mean, do you have a thought about that?
I'm probably not, well, I have to be careful, but I don't know how I feel about that because when you look at where we are with the taxes that we're levying, want us to tax and levy people out.
Yeah, and that's my concern. I was just wondering for information purposes. I got 2 more. The other thing is, when I worked for the state, we were recognizing that people were retiring and then coming back to work for a department and basically getting a pension and getting paid. And so I can see us, maybe looking at something like that if we don't already have it for city government, but I don't think that we could prevent someone who leaves city government proper from going to somewhere else and not collecting their pension. But, if we don't have that sort of provision, within city government, I think we need to look at something like that to prevent that type of double dipping. Finally, you mentioned looking at an inventory of our property and land we owned. That brings me back to kind of when we originally started looking for a chief strategy officer. And one of the things that we were looking at was to have somebody come on board and kind of do an inventory and provide to us some sort of reporting on or recommendation on surplus property or surplus land or surplus buildings. And so, I would hope that we are still in the process of doing that as part of your chief strategy officer duties. I know that the ordinance does say that there are supposed to be regular meetings in accounting with the chief strategy officer and council. And so I look forward to hearing from you in June regarding future OPEB discussions, but I also look forward to hearing from you as to, what are some of the cost savings on other things like our property and other departments that we've done, and to look for savings there as well.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Spitzley. Next up is Councilmember Wood.
Before I ask Judy some questions, I just wanted to give a little bit of clarification to some of the comments made by Councilmember Betts and Councilmember Spitzley. First of all, the contracts have been negotiated with the unions, that it's over a 5-year period that they look at the income and not the last year. And part of that has been done to alleviate some of the problems of garnering a lot of overtime in the last year to increase their pensions. So that's one area. Second is the fact that all retirees are required to to turn in their income, and if their income exceeds a certain amount, then their pension is reduced. So if they are receiving on another job, receiving additional income, then that can affect their overall pension. Next, with police and fire, and I've said this before, police and fire employees do not get Social Security. So many of them do go to work after they have retired in order to get their quarters in for Social Security in order to receive Social Security. So, unless state law changes that allows for that, we would be hampering their ability where, such as a Teamster employee or a UAW employee, they're also getting their retirement and their Social Security. And then I wanted to touch a little bit on the assumption rate. And when we look at the spikes of up and down, one of the reasons for changing the assumption rate and reducing that down is because even if you have a good year in the market, but you do not, in all of your categories, your buckets where you have money invested, meet the 8%, it is considered a loss. And then that is spread over a 5-year period of monies that come in to make up that loss. So we have, on the boards, have looked at making it realistic. Now, if you go over the past 10 years, we have been above the 8%. But you have any given year when the markets can have fluctuated, and that we might have come in at 6%. And so we have that 2% loss that we have to cover over a 5-year period. So that's where some of those come in. One of the things that Judy, you spoke to that I think that might be something that we really need to take a look at. When we went to self-funding, the retirement boards at that time did an audit on self-funding. And I don't believe there's been another audit done on that in some time. In looking at the determination of those figures and whether those are accurate. And I would encourage that if we did anything as part of an audit, that be one of the things that we jumped on right away, and that's the self-funding application there. I'm not sure how many employees are under that the self-funding right now, but that are part of the retirement system, but I think that needs to be something that we take a look at with that. The other is, even though that there was an increase in what both police and fire and ERS are paying this year because we made changes, when you look over the expansion of that, actually it will reduce what we have to pay for the years moving out. And so this increase for this next couple of years is there, but then it will be less than what had been predicted that we would pay without these changes. Isn't that correct, Judy?
You're 100% correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we looked at that. And I think one of the other things in the funding for the investment for the OPED, that had been done by the defined contribution board. And so not the other boards, not the ERS board and not the police and fire board. So one of the things I would like is, and Eric, if you could work on that with Judy, is to look at what those boards, are they still up and running? Are they still, what investments are they making? And lastly, we do a comparison yearly with MERS, with the state, to determine whether our investments are doing as well as what the state's overall fund has been doing. And I know, Peter, you're aware of this, but we have, our money managers have looked at this as well as our actuary, and actually we're doing better than what the state is in our investments and in our what our returns are. So I think that's important to point out. I know there has been talk in the past about turning this over to them instead of having our own boards take care of it. But I will tell you that we're doing better at investing than what they are. So those are my things. Thank you.
It's very true.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. Next up, Councilmember Dunbar.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I took notes when the slides were up there, but I just wanted to make sure, since I don't have those. Judy, you had mentioned that the OPEB liabilities were 736 million in 2019. Did I correct that? And they were 906 in 20.
Correct.
Okay. That is a $170 million jump in 1 year.
So the reason why it's going to be hard to put apples to apples, and that's why I showed you what the third column indicated, is because what I did is I asked our actuary, I gave him all the premiums, he updated tables, and he knows what the new cost is. So that's an actual, the new amount that I gave you is the actual, because the 906 and the 736.6, that's based on the old healthcare systems with the old premiums. But the new number, not the 906, but the newer number of 826 is based on putting in, the Humana cost, the self-funding. So that actually is the number that has the healthcare system that we have. The thing that I've been trying to do is to work closely with him so that when we are giving you data, it's based on our actual, the reality of the healthcare that we're using, the actual premiums. So that's why I know, that's why I tried to, and I hopefully I did a good job of showing this, the difference between 2019, because that was under an old healthcare system. And so it was different. Does that make sense?
Okay. So are you saying that what it should have been in 19 was 826?
No, No, because under, okay, let me see, let me figure out a better way to say this. So under 2019, all the post 65 people, they were in 8 different medical plans. And so just by the economy of scales, when you go from 8 plans down to 1 and you negotiate fees and make some changes, it costs less. We're paying less in our healthcare, and it's reflected. It wasn't reflected in 2019 because we were paying more in 2019, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm understanding the concept of the efficiencies of scale by moving to a single plan. What I'm not getting, so the 736 is what it was under the old plan, but under the new plan that has been consolidated, it is much higher.
But there's more to it than that. Then there's
President Spatafor, could I jump in here real quick for Councilmember Dunbar?
Be great for me to because I'm basically trying to understand on average how we're increasing $100 million.
Oh, yeah, and I think part of the reason too, Councilmember Dunbar, there were changes in assumptions and mortality tables and
That's
growth rates. So there were.
it's the
I was going to
mortality.
tell her that if I was going to be given a chance. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
it is
we
more-
didn't just change one variable,
No.
we changed all, it's the worst scientific method experiment you've ever seen, but that's the reason that all those variables changed at once. And there was also, correct me if I'm wrong, Judy, there was a GASB rule change, so we had to carry more liability than we used to carry.
Correct.
Yeah, and the mortality table hadn't been updated since the 1990s. And so this showed that people were living longer. So that had, put an increase on what you're paying and what the long-term would be there. And, we've said this over and over again, if people passed on sooner, then we'd have less liability. So, I mean, that's, and we made those comments before on the retirement board, but, the reality is that because healthcare's gotten better and people are taking better care of themselves, they're living longer. So we just adopted the new table that we were required to do because you could take a 1950 table and use that and reduce your liability down to nothing. But legally, that isn't what we can do.
Okay, so I'm enjoying watching Council President Spatafor smirking at the idea.
I was hearkening back to the debate over Obamacare, and
I know. Yes. So and I say that lovingly. So my question, I guess ultimately, and thank you for clarifying that all of the criteria basically got updated at the same time, which made a massive difference in the liabilities that we have. But moving forward, and maybe even based on prior years, differentiations under the old system, like, is the amount that we anticipate moving forward, the increase, are we anywhere close to at least stopping the gap on that, so that the money that we're putting into the system now will eventually outpace the money that the inflationary rate goes up over time? That, I guess that's the catch-up game. So
Exactly.
Where are we with that?
I can tell you in a month, because there are some other alternatives that I'm looking at and working with our actuary on that will make this look dramatically different. There's a lot of different factors. And I wish we were at the point where we could just fund it the way that it needs to be funded, but we're making up for prior when it wasn't funded accurate or 100% or even 90% or even 80%. So I totally understand what you're asking. I can better answer that next month, because there are some other alternatives and other meetings and planning that I am going to be doing that is going to help us to answer that better.
Okay, because that's truly, like, we're never going to make a dent in it if we can't contribute what's required to deal with the inflationary increase every year of what those are. Also, I wanted to say kudos to you, and I didn't do it earlier, and I almost forgot. You had said you thought that it was a great idea to go out to the community and find out from them, like, what ideas are floating. What a novel idea. I love it. Because you're right. I mean, there are other people in the private sector, there's other people in the business community that are all dealing with these type of, costs and everything. And maybe they've got some creative idea as to how to address this that we don't. And so I think that that's extremely valuable to value the potential input from those we have no clue how much could impact our decision making and that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunbar. We have Councilmember Brian Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I hate to sound like a pessimist sometimes, but whenever I hear about this, it just comes upon me. And now it seems to feel like we're swimming like against the tide. And, supposedly, according to my mom, if you ever get caught in a tide, you just like let it take you out. But I don't know if we can do that here. But besides that, I have a few questions. And I understand that we just jumped from 7-something all the way up to 906, minus this new savings to possibly 8-something. I guess one question is, were any of the recommendations from the financial health team still relevant? Like, are they still working? Are you guys still working together? Because I know they've been working for years on this. And two, just for information, I'm just curious, what would have the projected savings been if that first healthcare switch happened and not the one that I think is saving people or putting 80 million savings? And then third, so I'm also a little concerned, like, creative funding and all that sounds great. And, you're the expert professional and I know you're going to do a great job, but it almost seems like, when we say things like, we're going to make it look better, we're going to, do all these different things, but I don't know, is it going to change our situation? Like actually change it? And then as far as investments, I'm a little confused. So does the stock market have anything to do with our number? Because the stock market has been doing very well the last 2 years and our numbers don't seem to reflect that. So I was just curious. I know that was just a lot of questions, but they've all been on my mind. So if you can try to hack out any of those answers, I'd appreciate it.
No, that's great. No, I appreciate that. And I know that you said you're a pessimist, but I'm an optimist. I believe that we can do this and we will do this because we don't have a choice. There are a lot of opportunities, a lot of options. One thing, and I will share this with you if I don't know how much time I have, but I have several things I want to share with you, but have we thought about growing out of this problem? What do I mean by that? Well,
I drank too much coffee as a child. I'm not getting any taller.
I don't want to tax people to death. I want people to move into Lansing. I want new businesses. I want the South End to thrive and for businesses to be there. Let's open incubators. Let's bring more employers here. There are cities that have grown out of these issues, and I want Lansing to be that city. So how do you do that? Well, you have to be intentional. You have to have a vision. How are we doing this? What are we looking at? How are we, what do we want Lansing to look like economically, socially, and demographically in the next 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years? Well, why do people live here? Well, it's affordable. The cost of living is very reasonable. The crime rate and statistics aren't bad. Climate, weather, we have no control over, right? Employment opportunities. LEAP has been trying to bring businesses here. There's so much that we can do as far as raising up entrepreneurs. If you think about it, America, through these different periods, the Industrial Revolution, blah, 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 all the different investments, all the different inventions, we can do this. And I know I probably sound like a cheerleader, but you know what? I am. I was born and raised here, and I believe that we have what it takes to make a difference and to change this city. And you know what? We have partners, the state of Michigan. They wanted to talk about, well, how can we help you as far as, you know, do you need studies? What about opportunities? If you want people to move downtown, what about incentives? They want to partner with us. They don't, you know, Department of Treasury, MISHDA, MEDC. I really feel that we are primed to make an incredible difference and to make Lansing the way that we want and need it to be. We have the opportunities, we have the resources. I would rather us grow out of this than have to tax people and cut budgets and what have you. So I'm sorry, I'll get off my hobby horse there. But to answer your question, yes, the stock market does have something to do with this. And Carol can back me up on this part, that it was probably fortuitous and good for us to be able to cut the 1 year off of the amortization schedule, because we did do well financially, and the, you know, right, our heads go like this. So this was a good time to make some of those changes. And it's not, when I say creative, I'm not talking about cooking the books. I would never cook the books. I don't have the kind of guts or I have integrity. I would never do that. There is a way to do this. Part of what is difficult for some people with this piece is that in 2017, I believe, or 2016 is when this law came into effect that the OPEB has to show up on your balance sheets. So part of this is an accounting thing. It's an accounting thing that it's hard for people to grasp. So what we have to do is look at how can we grow? How can we have a plan to get us out of the 60-40. So, I mean, we have to set these goals, hit it, and then keep moving forward. And we can do this.
It's kind of like if your savings account already had to start carrying the balance of your mortgage, and that would be the balance of your savings account. It's not necessarily an accurate portrayal of your assets.
That's correct.
I forgot where, Brian, are you satisfied with the answers as of now, or did you need to probe a little more?
I appreciate, yeah, I never would suggest that you would cook the books. I guess I just mean, like, you know how you can do different designs that have different outcomes. So I'm just worried about that. And by outcomes, I mean numbers, but not actual outcome. Right. Yeah, I'll wait. Maybe I'll have something else. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Garza.
Thank you, Council President Spatafor, and thank you for being here, Mrs. Keeler. Most of my questions were answered. The only question I have right at this point in time is, does the American Rescue Plan, does that help with our unfunded liability at all? And if so, okay, I'm seeing shaking the heads no.
I'm giving you a high five because I'm glad you asked that, because you might know we cannot utilize those funds for pension or OPEB. But one thing we could do is when we get the $6 million from the state, we still can make one-time payments to help. You know, it's like paying your mortgage, make an extra payment. It does, knock down the balance. So I mean, there are ways that we can still make additional payments.
Thank you.
Okay, before I go on Councilmember Batts, Vice President Hussein, you had your hand up earlier and it's gone now. I want to get to you before we go second round around. Did you want to say anything, or are you good?
Nope, my question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Batts.
Thank you, President Spatafor. You know, I've Ms. Keeler, something that you said, I started thinking about a little bit, and you were saying, we want a lot of economic opportunity, we want a lot of economic growth and stuff like that. And part of what I think is important to that is having city workers want to work here and feel like they're going to get paid in the end, right? And, one of my concerns throughout the COVID-19 pandemic has been, and, we won't get into the politics of the healthcare decision, but we saw some response by people who are working in unions who are saying, we're not going to get paid what we're told we're going to get paid. And what that ends up meaning, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, is instead of our unions asking for pension plans, which are very safe, secure, funded by the government and all of that stuff, when they start saying that they aren't safe and having a pension anymore, they're going to start asking us for 401ks with matches. And one of my concerns there is that has a huge upfront cost for the city. And so if we're talking 5, 10, 15 years from now, our costs might go up just because unions say, oh, it's too risky for us to put our workers into a pension system in the city of Lansing because they don't pay their debts. So there's one answer to that and one solution to that, and it's paying more money. It's not actuarial decisions. It's not assumptions on mortality rates. It's putting real dollars forward. And so that's the reason I was asking earlier and why I'm still interested in what percentage of our payment to our liabilities this year is actually an increase over what an increase that will contribute to an increase in our funding ratio. So I appreciate it, President Spadafore, and thank you again, Ms. Keeler, for being here.
Thank you. It looks like that's all the questions from council. I did a couple questions for you, Judy. You mentioned plan audits. Have we done a like intensive dependency audits and things like that? What kind of plan audits have we done or are we planning to do to ensure that we're not paying for someone's great uncle's coverage on our, that kind of thing?
Or FIDOs?
Yes.
No, there have been some audits, but what I think would be good is to have a comprehensive audit to make sure that, our base is correct, that everyone that is due insurance is covered and on, the right plan. So it's everything. And it also includes what, Carol talked about with, looking at the self-funding as well, the self-funded plans as well.
Have we ever had, Carol, maybe you can answer this question, or someone, Judy, certainly if you can, I'll leave it to you first. Have we ever done, I know like when my husband works for a public entity and we have to sign a form that says my cost of insurance is more at my employer for me to take insurance than to use Michigan, the public entity's employment or insurance. So that's kind of like getting I wouldn't say offloading, but moving people to the more cost-effective plans. Is that something that we've ever done in the city or through our CBAs?
I don't think we have. I know
Carol?
my employer does the same thing.
Yeah.
What the contracts negotiated was the fact that now only the employee receives the insurance. So, so I think that's what if you both have an option for insurance, you can only one of you can have that. So you can either go on your husband's or your wife's plan at another entity, or you can be on the city's, but you can't be on both.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's all I got too. I don't see other hands, but Judy, it sounds like there is going to be an encore presentation after the budget is done. So we'll work with you and Mark to schedule the next appearance here in front of Cal. But is there anything else you wish to add before we call it done?
Can I just ask? So I know that we're still in COVID and trying to figure out things, but to have these meetings with constituents and unions, I mean, what's your suggestion as far as like, should it be a hybrid meeting? Do you think it should be all Zoom? I just would love to get a sense from you what you would be comfortable in.
I think the answer lies in speaking with council members Hussein, Garza, Jackson, and Betts on how they've been successful in navigating those constituent contact meetings through the pandemic and what might be coming down the road. But I think that's a good idea to start thinking about that. But I know if you need help with Zoom, we can certainly help with that. But I think as we get closer and closer to normal, I know we just announced today, you can go back to not City Hall, excuse me, don't get confused. The governor just announced that they're lifting the work from home restrictions in 2 weeks. So I think things are going to start to get a little bit more opened up again. So hybrid or in person might even be on the table.
Right. One last thing for you too. I did mention before that I would like to do, so we have an internal audit, of all of our finances, but I do have a part-time person working with me now, yay. So I'd like to engage in the operational audit. And what that is, for instance, when I was the treasurer, the team would sit down and we looked at workflow. We looked at, first of all, what are we bound to do by the charter and ordinance? What functions do we serve? Who do we serve? So we, kind of got a sense of who we are first. And then we talked about the best ways to deliver services. And then this was great. Before the pandemic hit, I had a self-directed group of folks that were talking about, wouldn't it be interesting to eliminate paper? So they actually developed a process for auditing the income tax returns, right, from home. And they took every return, is what, 15 pages, depending on what schedules you're filing. So they actually reduced, they had initially had to print 6,000 pieces of paper a day. They eliminated that. And that, yeah, so, it made it more efficient, less paper, we saved costs. People weren't standing at the copy machine. You weren't spending so much in printing, and the ink cartridge and things like that. So I really would like to have a look at all of City Hall efficiency wise, because I know that there are ways that we can reduce expenditures and save time and create more efficiencies through technology, through processes. So I have not given up on that because that's one of the things I love to do. And I really think that we would benefit from that.
Listen, I'm using our new paperless meeting software, so I started.
So you understand.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I do have one hand up. Councilmember Dunbar.
Thank
Go
you. It made me think of two other questions. The first is, when are we going to go to electronic filing for our own taxes? That's just probably rhetorical, but I need to get IT on that because we would save so much money on back end compliance, trying to get folks to, it would be just so much easier. So I beg for that pretty continually. The second thing is there through either Michigan Municipal League or these other communities, is there a network of CFOs, treasurers from different communities that get together and brainstorm OPEB reduction and things like that? Because in the same way that we were talking about going out to the community and asking for creative ideas, like I think that there's benefit in culling the resources of other communities that are trying to tackle this. And are you part of a network of any kind that's working on this statewide? Is there any value in establishing something like that?
That's a really good question. I know that they talk about it in MML. I actually have reached outside of the state because many of the cities in Michigan are dealing with this. So I was looking more outward to people that have actually solved it. I did want to punch one person that I talked to because, they solved their OPEB in 2 years and they had a substantial number outstanding. They discovered oil. We don't have that option. I know. So there are people outside of Michigan that have mastered this. And so I've been tapping into them, but that's a good idea. Councilmember Dunbar, you're right.
And I will answer your first question, Councilmember Dunbar. You can actually file your 1040 EZ form electronically on the City of Lansing website.
If I had an easy.
Right.
Well, and that was a project when I was treasurer that I started with the team because Laserfish was one of the mechanisms that we could do because there's not a company that makes a software for municipalities. They do for the state and they do for the feds. So in compliance, Councilmember Dunbar, that's another thing that is being looked at.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Judy, thank you for being here this evening, and we will stay in touch about our next rendezvous as a group.
Okay, so I can go eat dinner now, or do you?
You may, yes. I smell halibut in my room, but we're not quite finished yet here. So, okay. Thank you very much, Judy. Very good information, and I appreciate you coming this week.
Thank you very much.
Be well. All right, folks, our next item is the discussion on our budget review our budget policies and budget wrap up. So the vision for tonight is if you're ready to present some amendments you'd like us to consider as a group, tonight would be the preferred night to do it. Otherwise, we do have one more committee of the whole meeting next week. We'll try to keep the agenda light for that as well. We will open it up for discussions right now, starting with council members Spitzley, then Wood.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I forwarded each one of you my thoughts this afternoon, and I apologize for the lateness of it, but to just kind of give some background, last week there was a news article, news on the news. They talked about cold cases in the city of Lansing, and I was stunned to find out we have 85 unsolved murders in the city of Lansing. And we have one person, one detective assigned to cold cases, and she's not even assigned full time. She's just assigned to when she can get to it. And so I called the police chief, and I also called the mayor to talk to them about it and talk to them about what resources would they need to have a decent cold case unit. As we talk about reimagining police and reimagining what we do for public safety, this in my mind is one of those things where we would look at resources, divert resources, or reimagine our public safety to address these cold cases. I agree with the police chief. We owe the loved ones of these victims our ability to do all we can to try to investigate these and address these cold cases. And so when I talked to the mayor about it, my initial thought, and I put it in the email, was to establish a cold case unit with some COVID dollars. And the mayor told me that the COVID funding has already been allocated to kind of plug our budget and do other things, and I get that. So he does know I'm going to be mentioning this, but $250,000 allocated toward the creation of a cold case unit within the Lansing Police Department to provide for one additional detective, one half law support, either a retired prosecutor or even somebody from our law department, an investigative support position, one IT professional support position, and one administrative support position. And so, I would like, if that is not included in the budget this year, I would like it to be a priority for us going forward to really look at how we can address this. I mean, we always hear that, our police officers don't prevent crime, that they really should be used, diverted to, trying to solve crime or trying to investigate crimes. And so this would be a perfect opportunity to kind of reinvent or reimagine part of our police department to add a cold case unit. And so that's kind of the amendment I would like to have for discussion.
Okay, Councilmember Spitzley, are you moving an amendment to that effect?
I am moving
to add that the language you sent us in an email to the budget priorities.
I am moving that. Yes.
Okay, it's a proper motion before us. So I'm going to ask anyone who has their hand up to talk about something else to put it down for just a moment, please, and then raise your hand if you want to discuss Councilmember Spitzley's amendment. Starting with Councilmember Wood.
Thank you. Just so that I'm clear on this, you are not proposing making a change in the budget, but asking that this be part of the resolution, and that we look at the potential of JAG dollars and other things like that over the course of this next year to try to fund this. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, I've been told that there are no dollars in the budget for it this year. I mean, I've been told that. And so, I am not a person to put something in the budget for it to be vetoed or taken out at the last minute. But I do want this as part of our priorities so that we can have a concerted effort to try to find dollars to fund this unit.
So maybe, part of that would be that this either be assigned to public safety or ways and means to do some, investigating and bring it back to committee of a whole and, quarterly or every 6 months or something, so that that it shows that there's action.
I'm okay with that. I think that's a great idea, Councilmember Wood. I mean, we put forth our budget priorities in August, and I'm really hoping that we can put forth, if it goes through public safety, put forth a strong proposal to include it in the budget and figure out where we can get the dollars to fund this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember, Vice President Hussein, you're up next.
Yeah, so Kara actually asked my question, but I guess as a follow-up, since you did have a conversation with the chief and the mayor, we announced a partnership with Detroit Crime Commission. I think it was back at maybe the end of January. And so I'm curious as to whether or not you all in your discussions talked about the relationship that we now have in place, the potential of that relationship, what we're expecting out of that. Is that we really didn't have a comprehensive presentation on what that even meant. So what that could potentially mean for bolstering that cold case unit, because I do know we have at this point one sergeant. She's up to her ears, obviously, in casework. But so I guess I'm just because the timing is interesting to me, but I'm generally supportive, right, of building up that unit. But I am a little curious in terms of what you were able to learn or glean.
I talked about that, and I didn't get a clear picture of if that's sustainable, if it's enough resources to kind of meet our needs. We got that $10,000 grant from I think it wasn't from DTE, but it was from AT&T, I think, and that's great. But I think we're still looking. My thought was having a consistent resources dedicated to solving these. Now, of course, talking to the chief, if there are other issues that are happening, they would be pulled from that to, address other issues, but that these would be people specifically dedicated for that. So maybe as part of public safety, and I would love to be a part of that. If you guys have this, you could bring the chief in and have him discuss that and how those funds tie into the cold cases. Because I'm not 100% clear either.
Okay, we have 2 more hands up, but it does sound like Councilmember Spitzley that maybe you'll be withdrawing a formal motion and this will be going to committee for further, we'll send it to public safety for further.
No, my motion is to include it as the budget priorities.
Okay.
But keeping in mind that while it's in the budget priorities and we know it won't be funded, we can still be doing the work, if I'm not mistaken, Councilmember Wood, by taking it to public safety and fleshing out the details and trying to find funding for it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, then I will keep going down the list. Councilmember Dunbar.
Thank you. I will say that I am generally in support of the concept of having more money go into investigative processes at the LPD. I am not a believer in there is no money in the budget. I mean, we are the ones who put the budget together, so we decide whether there's money in the budget. And for me, given the efforts that we are making to reduce points of contact in general between officers and the public in regard to reducing the amount of ordinances that we're criminalizing, making them misdemeanors, the efforts that we're doing to curb sort of the traffic stops and what have you. For me, I would rather say that it's a priority that we take $250,000, if you believe that that's what it's going to cost, from the existing police budget and reallocate it into investigations. Because I think that much of what we're hearing from the community is, and that we know statistically, is police are not preventing crime. They are investigating crime, and that we should be focusing their efforts in those areas where they do have an impact. And so that's where I would be. I wouldn't be about putting it in to find money for it in the future. I would say that it's a priority that in this current budget, we take 250 out of the existing, personnel and allocate like a body, an additional body to do this work and the IT work. And I think somebody mentioned the regional crime partnerships. That is also something I've looked into. There are, in much the same way the FBI sort of comes into communities as needed to do investigative work, there can be, in the same way that there's a tri-county narcotics unit, what have you. I mean, there could be thought that we do some regional work on investigations and borrow resources when necessary in communities that need more investigative work, versus not, and share and pool resources that way. But those are my two comments. And the first one being, let's allocate the money from the existing budget.
Okay, Councilmember Betts.
Thank you, President Spatafor, and thank you, Councilmember Spitzley, for bringing this forward. I'm generally supportive of increasing investigative efforts, especially with cold cases. We know that there's a few notable ones around here. I think that I guess my question is, how are we writing this now, knowing that the COVID funds are pre-allocated? I guess pre-allocated, we're using it loosely here. However, I guess my question is, are we looking for new funding out of the general fund, or are we talking about reallocating funding within the police department? And if it is the latter, my suggestion would actually be to throw this in our budget policies document, where we say, part of the we should be taking one additional detective out of the investigative unit and assign them to cold cases or something like that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Betts. I think that's my proposal, is to include it in the budget priority. So I appreciate that.
One thing I had, thank you, Councilmember Betts and Councilmember Spitzley. Councilmember Wood, I see your hand. I have a question or an observation before we move to you. Patricia, I have a question. So I'm not entirely sure COVID funds are even an eligible expenditure for new personnel like this, and they're one-time funds for an ongoing expense. So I would be more comfortable if there was a discussion about either less specific, like Councilmember Dunbar spoke about, or more specific, like Councilmember Dunbar spoke about in general, or a broader proposal like you just mentioned, putting in the policies to talk about. So I'm looking at the COVID stuff, and I don't want to support something that can't be done. So that's where I am.
And that's fine. I mean, I initially thought of COVID funding, and I think it can be used for this, but I don't like one-time funding either. But it was just, for me, it was just an idea to get it started for this year and then weave it into the budget process next year. Clearly, since I've been told that the COVID funds have already been expended. And so I am willing to, put it as a generic budget priority to create a cold case unit, but also work through public safety to try to flesh out the specifics.
Councilmember Wood?
I just want to remind us that council cannot dictate to the department how they use their personnel.
Right.
So we can't put in a budget priority that you take a detective that's doing normal detective work and assign them to the cold case.
Right.
Now, we can, again, look at grants that are specific to the fact that they are meeting certain requirements. We can add to the budget personnel line items that with what our intent is that we want it to be used for. But again, that can also be vetoed by the mayor by adding additional personnel to that. So I just, I think after talking, and I know, Patricia, you called different council members and you and I had talked, and I think the idea of the concept of having the funding to facilitate having the cold case, a good network for that makes sense. And trying to fish that out on different places that we can put those grants, in. You can do them with the prosecutor's office, you can do them, regionally, you can, a number of those grants that we receive, there's the ability to do that. So I think that that's where I think it makes more sense at this point. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more speakers on this issue, and then I'm gonna see if we can move on. So Councilmember Dunbar and then Councilmember Betts.
Okay, I guess one of my questions might have been answered, but I still, I recognize that we cannot dictate how personnel is allocated in an administrative budget, but I think it's also a good priority to set forward to let the mayor know that that's something that we would want done. I mean, I personally would take a road cop off of duty and get another detective to focus on that, because I think that that's truly where the efforts of our police should be, is in problem solving and especially the cold cases. So I'll just put that out there again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunbar. Councilmember Betts.
I guess my only question to Councilmember Wood, and thank you for saying that, is it not something that we can put in our budget policies document? I know that we have, some things that, are associated with utilizing our resources. For example, non-motorized vehicle safety, we say, is something that we should be paying attention to, which obviously indirectly implies a budgetary response. So couldn't we also put something in there about possibly reallocating investigators to cold cases? If it's a no, that's fine. I'm just interested in what the specifics of this are, what we're allowed to do.
Councilmember Betts, you have 2 documents that you're working with. One, you have the budget resolution that does the appropriation, and then if there are follow-ups that are part of that budget appropriation that you add to that. Then you have your budget priorities that are due in October 1st to the mayor, that lists the wants of the things that we want to see happen as part of the budget. So in this document, you could absolutely put the fact that you are asking the Ways and Means, the Public Safety Committee, to do an investigation to determine if there are funds available to meet the criteria of putting together a cold case unit. And then you could do the same thing in September when we put those together and say for the mayor's budget that you're asking that they officer or reallocate the officers that are there to do X, Y, and Z. But that's I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think so. I must be a little bit confused, because I know that there's budget priorities, there's a budget resolution, but then we also have the budget policies floating around as well, which I believe we vote on at the same time as the budget. So I was just trying to.
Yeah, that's part of the budget resolution. Yeah.
Okay.
These are part of the budget resolution.
Okay, I appreciate it.
So Councilmember Spitzley and then Councilmember Hussein.
Well, why don't we let Councilmember Hussein?
Okay,
ask
Councilmember Hussein?
now, right?
No, just very quickly, I was actually going to, I feel like I've said this about 8 times tonight. I was going to try to clarify budget priorities and policies as well. And for me, when we take a look at this, absolutely the policy, putting this forth in the policy makes sense to hold us accountable to doing the work. But then when we put together our wish list of sorts and send it over to the administration as their departments start to actually put together their budgets for fiscal year 23, I think that's where we can really start to insert some of this language. I would agree with Kathy. If this is, a budget is supposed to reflect our priorities, and if this is something that you believe we need now, and you have enough information now, I think you can find $250,000 in the budget. I don't know if that's from the existing police department budget. I certainly don't know if it's from special operations. I would challenge anyone to work with special operations for a day or two. And you will find out just how many cases, active cases, each one of our detectives is working. They are all incredibly, incredibly overworked. But again, I think Carol and myself brought some $500,000 worth of amendments last year. A number of those got through, some of them didn't. But that is our job, is to go through that line item budget to find, is it a lean budget? Absolutely. But again, if this is a priority and you think it's important enough, I would challenge you over the course of the next week to find the money.
And taking up that, I'll take that challenge, and I'm going to withdraw my resolution or my proposed resolution and rework it and bring it back next Monday.
Thank you, Councilmember Spitzley. Good discussion tonight, folks.
Thank
All right,
you
so
all. It was a good discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
so now moving to other folks. Councilmember Wood, did you have something you wanted to add, talk about?
Yes, I have a couple of things. First of all, this is to the administration. At the beginning of the budget cycle, I asked about the Teamsters. All other contracts had been settled with raises except for the Teamsters. And at that time, it was indicated, the mayor indicated that they were going to be meeting with the Teamsters on that to look at their contract. It's only a year contract. So my question is, has that been done? And have you negotiated that? And will there be an amendment? Will there be any need for an amendment to the budget to incorporate those wage increases? Or was it written into the budget?
Mark or Jim, are you able to answer that question?
I don't know of any conversations that have taken place. That doesn't mean they haven't. I'm happy to check in with Nick and the mayor and get back to you unless Jim happens to know. Or Jake, I see you pop.
Negotiations, no, I don't.
So does Jake or Robert know whether the potential of an increase for the Teamsters, whether that was baked into the budget or not?
That was something we were looking at when we developed the budget. Not something I'm really prepared to go into too much detail on, but I do know that we're discussing potential ways to reward our employees for the sacrifices that they made over the previous year.
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, Councilman Wood, Nick just texted me to say that there's nothing final yet, but we are in discussions with T214 and T243.
Okay, I would like to know the answer to this before we pass the budget, because if there needs to be an amendment made to the budget, I need to know what those figures would be. So if we need to take a look at that, because that was a promise that was made, and the last thing we should be doing is passing this budget without, when all other unions received wage increases and not do something with Teamsters. And then my next is, I had mentioned this when we had the discussion about the diversity and equity dollars that the mayor had proposed, the $300,000, and whether you want this amendment now, Mr. President, or what, but what I've talked to the mayor, and he would not oppose having this $300,000 put into a control account. That would also include a budget policy that would state that that control account, before it could be appropriated, would have to come back to council so that we can review what that would, how those dollars would be spent.
Yeah, I don't know. This is my first experience with a control account too. So if you have something in writing, or if it's just simply that's how it works, and you say it's in a control account, I guess that would work too. But I appreciate you bringing it forward tonight. And if you've got something in writing for next week or even this evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I can have it for you this evening, but I'll get it to everybody the first part of next week so we can get that in there, unless the mayor wants to. And where did Mark go? Unless the mayor wants to propose that, since we've had this conversation. I don't care. I just want to make sure that that's what happens.
Great. And I will just, not to correct, I will remind you that we actually have another meeting in 7 days. So the first part of next week will be too late, but.
I meant this week.
Okay, very
next
good.
Week. I meant this week.
This is, I think, our 4th in a row. So it's getting, we're all running our marathon this week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councilmember Jack. Oh, sorry. Councilmember Woodward, is that it?
Those were the ones that I had. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think the only takeaway, and I think one of the takeaways, rather, Eric, and you wrote that down, was the Teamsters, a potential increase for the Teamsters included in this budget, or would any settled contract require a budget amendment? Okay. And then the control account question as well. All right, Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. As I tried to think about good faith exploration of the police budget, and also the understanding that it is our largest expenditure and it continues to get bigger, which is not sustainable. And it continues to get larger as our obligations to our unfunded liability also get larger. So those two things just continue to grow. So definitely not sustainable. My amendment would not take any money from the police budget. The police budget would still grow even if this amendment is passed. What I propose is that since the police department officers, there's vacant positions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but those positions, there's at least always a vacancy. And if there's not, it's for a short period of time until there's a vacancy again. There's currently vacancies. So I would propose that the new social worker that's proposed to go into the police department still go there, but that the funding for it be moved from one of the vacant police officers to fund the social worker. And then there's a difference of $22,015 that can be made up through basically the police operating budget. And that would just take a little bit from a few line items there. I'm not suggesting that we take away the clothing that they asked for, the crossing guard to the police or to the school district, the pension contribution, the radio upgrades, those all, or the social worker, but that we don't just add to it when we don't necessarily have to. But what I do suggest is that we take the money that would have been allocated to the new social worker minus the difference and move that to work on our equity and our public health crisis that is happening in Lansing. So I heard the control account idea. I'm not opposed to that. Initially, I was thinking if it's legal that we could just put it into that 1.3% of the human health and human resources budget and add to that, and 1.3% to do equity work of one department's budget is very small. And I think it came out to like 100-some thousand. So we could increase that and everything would stay the same as far as social worker, levels of staff, and everything. So that's my proposal. I think that it was emailed, some work that Eric helped with. It was emailed for council members earlier this last week.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Yes, for those of you who are wondering about the email, I think Sherry forwarded it to us on May 5th, 2020 at 6:57 p.m. So that if it's in your inbox, Councilmember Wood, you had a question. Well, so Brian, I actually have a question before we move on because I didn't hear a motion, but what I see in front of me is a couple different things, but it wasn't. Maybe Eric can explain what's in front of us as well, because I don't see in here. I thought what I was looking at was adding yet another social worker. So that's what I thought we were looking at. So and then I don't see a commensurate transfer to resolution work, but maybe I'm just not seeing it. Or I'm sorry, excuse me, EDI work. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. So if I could have Mr. Brewer explain the document that we received. And Carol, I'll get to you in just a second. I just want to clarify what we're talking about first. So, Mr. Brewer?
Yes, what it was a request by Councilmember Jackson to basically take a vacant police position. Currently, the budget as proposed by the mayor has one social worker, and the request was to add an additional social worker. We had discussion. I had a discussion with Councilmember Jackson about what department that would be best allocated to. I recommended that the allocation probably be within the police department. There was discussion about moving it to HCRS, but what we did is we just reallocated that amount. The only thing was that I thought the police vacancy was going to be cost neutral to the social worker. Upon my inquiry from the finance staff, that was not the case. There was additional funding that needed to be done for $22,015. Thus, we needed to grab some more money, from somewhere. And so miscellaneous operating from police and min was reduced by that amount. As you know, miscellaneous operating is discretional by the departments. It's kind of a catch-all, just like our miscellaneous operating with the council is. So I thought that it would not impact operations within the police. And it would be a safe amount to pull from. So what that was is that was moved from operational to personal. And so the result of that is just a reallocation. Everything remains the same in the police department. All it is we're taking a police position that is vacant to a social worker position. Thus, the amendment would add 2 social workers, one from the original budget and then 1 additional budget based on the recommendation from Councilmember Jackson.
Councilmember Jackson?
So there would be, we already have 1 social worker hired with the Lansing Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
No matter whether it's the administration or my amendment, there would only be 1 additional one to make 2. That's what I was going for. And then that, so it wouldn't, so it wouldn't be 3, it would be 2, it would be 1 + 1.
It's just 2. Okay. So then where did the other, maybe Mr. Brewer, where did the other money go for it? Because I know the mayor proposed another social worker. So without reducing it, the road patrol, we're authorized, I think, what, 206 FTE for the police department?
That was already included in the budget amount already. They didn't separate, it's already within the police budget. What this is for the additional, this is just basically for a new position. And Jake can speak about that. There was on the thing that within the police budget, there's that additional social worker that the mayor pointed out that they were going to include in the budget or was already included in the budget. And obviously that's rolled up in the personnel and the operational costs within the police department. What this is just taking a vacant position that's already allocated within the budget and then reallocated to a social worker. And like I said, is obviously there's additional costs that is not included in the personnel line. So in other words, the social worker that the mayor had, what I did is just to be inclusive or have as much information. I looked at the budget to say, okay, the mayor was adding a social worker. So to not get it confused with the current proposed by the mayor social worker, this is a new additional social worker. that is not included within the mayor's proposal, is taking a vacant position of the police that is, within the police budget, and then allocating that to a social worker, which would therefore increase personal line items versus operational, because there's more personal line items cost for a social worker than what a police officer is. And that's detailed in the email.
Was the social worker that the mayor proposed not funded?
No, it's within the budget. It's already within the budget. That's already within the line item. I have to do anything. It's essentially in the budget, but I'll let Jake talk about that social worker position because that was in the mayor's proposal.
Okay, Councilmember, I see a few hands up, and the mayor has joined us too. I don't know if he wants to say anything, but Councilmember Jackson, you were raising your hand to just say something.
Yeah, I might be slightly confused about how much, if any, quote unquote, extra money is left over, but whatever there is, and I don't know if there is, but then we can talk about as far as where it should go. But I think that I might be a little confused on whether, because how it's the vacant positions funded and then it moves titles plus a little bit from the miscellaneous. I don't know if there is anything extra, but either way, I would still move the amendment when it's time.
Okay, so there is a proper motion before us. Councilmember Wood, I think, Councilmember Wood, you've got something different, right?
Yes, but I do want to add,
Go for
just
it.
jump on this as well. My question would be, Councilmember Jackson, you said this would be 2 social workers. What this would be is 3 social workers. The one that the mayor's funding, the one that's currently in the police budget, and then you asking for another one. So if you're not asking for a 3rd social worker, then you already got your social worker, which is going to be in the fire department, is where the mayor has allocated that position.
So my understanding is that the police budget increase for this proposed year includes 1 social worker. Is that not true anymore?
Which is what we already have, which was hired and we have.
Hold on. I think, Mr. Mayor, can you clarify, or Jake, your budget?
If I can jump in. So we have 1. My budget proposed to add an additional social worker. I believe Councilman Jackson, I don't want to speak for him, but I believe he is trying to pay for that additional one that I have added through the vacancies. Is that correct, Councilman?
That is correct.
I would remind everybody that, and he and I have spoken about this over text messaging, and I appreciate that. I would remind everybody that in my opinion, we are not going to necessarily have the same number of vacancies that we do right now. In my 3 years, we have filled them. We have what's the word? We have filled them in advance, knowing that there are retirements coming. So sometimes we go over a little bit, knowing there are going to be retirements coming. If we take money from the 206 and we say one of those positions will be funding the social worker, then we really only have 205 for this year. I can fill the 206, but then we don't have the money for the social worker. It also reduces our number by 1 for until we add more money. If we just move money from a vacancy into the social worker, which is why I proposed funding it so that we could fund 206 plus the existing social worker and the new social worker. There is not going to guaranteed be. There could be a vacancy the whole time, but there may not be. And again, we front load. That's the word I was looking for. We front load from time to time when we know that vacancies are coming, so that we have officers ready so we can stay at 206. So that's the numbers. I understand what the councilman is trying to do. He's trying to leave it at 1 + 1. But when it comes to the vacancy factor, I see what Eric did also. He took the money that would be there if we had a vacancy the whole time. But if we fill it this year, or if we fill it next year or the year after, we're still going to have an additional position that needs to be funded.
If I may, and I don't want to go back and forth direct with the mayor. I know that's not the procedure, but as long as I've been on council, not too long, this is year 4, there's always been conversation about we can't hire police officers, we can't fill these vacancies. I mean, how many is it now? And when was the last time it was filled, and how long was it ever filled for? So, I mean, it's such a big department anyway, where people do retire and people do move on, or people resign often enough that the way that it sounds like our human resources are and our hiring practices are, that's not competitive and fast. And the problems that causes us with having a full slate that you want means that we don't have that full slate. So why would we, add to, for example, the police budget when we don't have to, especially when it keeps growing? It's going to grow anyway. It's still going to get bigger.
Okay, I have a couple hands up, and then first is Councilmember Wood, then Betts.
I'm on my other issues, so I just got my hand up for that. Thank
All
you.
right. Yep. Councilmember Betts, then Dunbar.
Thank you, President Spatafor. I guess I'm a little bit, I've got two questions. The first is, does salary and fringe also take into account uniform, vehicle, and all of those other things that we'll need to pay for this additional social worker? My second question, I'm a bit confused between what the mayor's saying and what Council Member Jackson is saying. It sounds like the mayor is talking about us Brian's intent as us filling a temporary vacancy with a social worker, but then also adding a police officer on top of that to keep it at 206, where I think that Brian's intent, and Brian, tell me if I'm wrong, is to make our officers, decrease the number of officers to 205, fill the vacancy with a social worker and keep that social worker long-term. Is that right? I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what the arguments are going on right now. Thank you.
I'm not sure about if you got the mayor's side right, but yes, I mean, whatever the numbers are, the officers won't change because there's open positions. Yes, we move an open position and call it the proposed new social worker number 2, that we think is going to do great work for the department. And everything stays the same, numbers stay the same. We still struggle to hire officers and try to work on our improvements. And hopefully it happens to a point where we can say, look, 5 years later, 4 years later, 3 years later, we have a full slate where we got, people on deck because we changed our policies. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's
So,
it, that we don't just
I think, sorry for interrupting. I think that the mayor wants to keep our personnel levels, our police at 206 over the entirety of the time. You want to decrease it down to 205. And I think that's what, sorry,
I guess I don't know if I would count that as a decrease when we're accepting the proposed.
But technically, it's a decrease from the maximum amount of 206 for which we currently have vacancies. So it'd be decreasing what the mayor calls the optimal level of police, being 206, decreasing that down to 205, and instead having a social worker instead. I'm just trying to make sure that we're all having the same conversation here. But I'll be quiet. And then I guess the second question again is, does salary and fringe, this 92,000, cover equipment, uniform, stuff like that?
Okay, Councilmember Dunbar, then Hussein.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess I'm going to ask for clarification on what we heard earlier versus now. So yes, I am all for reallocating a vacancy as a social worker, although my preference has always been to put them in the fire department, not in the police department. But if we have the ability to reallocate that vacancy as a position, then we would have the ability to reallocate it as the cold case inspector or detective. Like if there's money available through a vacancy that we could take somebody off patrol and put them in that position. Now, the argument that we heard earlier was we can't make the mayor do anything with that funding. We can make the funding available, but can't tell him what to do. So even in this case, I think my worry would be, Councilmember Jackson, that we would go through the motions of saying we want this to go to a social worker, although it seems as if the other social worker is in play in the fire department. So again, I would want this to go to cold case, but that there is no guarantee that that would happen because it can be vetoed or ignored. So how do we have the ability to do it in this case, but we didn't earlier when we were talking about in the cold case inspector?
Well, I think the difference here is that, well, I don't think we can either way is what I would assume, and it would rely on the mayor being a willing partner in that change. It's the same with the cold case. We can say whatever we want in those dollars, but if there's not buy-in to do so, it's not going to happen. So I think that's the answer, but I'm seeing heads nodding from people who've been here longer than I have, and looks like I might be right.
So then I think the question that we need to ask then of the mayor is, are you willing to make those changes with the vacancy factor to put it into, say, a social worker or a cold case detective?
Well, and I'd like to say something. I mean, I got Councilmember Hussein as well, but I think that, I mean, the social worker is funded in the budget proposal. We have authorized for 206 personnel, and I agree with Councilmember Jackson that we do see regular vacancies occur. But I'm been around long enough to remember when we front loaded for anticipated retirements. So if we front load and we know someone's retiring, we don't have the money to replace a retirement, even if it keeps us at 205 or 204. We know 2 folks are retiring, those types of things. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I really appreciate that you sent it to us ahead of time, Councilmember Jackson, very much. But I don't see, in my personal opinion, the value in the change at this point. But I will stop talking. But Councilmember Hussein is next.
Yeah, just very quickly, kind of to piggyback on that. In my 5 years, I've seen us fill those vacancies. I've seen us front load, and I've seen us still struggle to respond to calls for service when you're looking at almost 300 a day. So I guess my question, Councilman Jackson, is did you talk to the chief? Were you able to determine what the impact would have in terms of our shifts, in terms of our ability to respond to calls for service, what it would do potentially to overtime? I'm sure you know that often our overtime budget is exhausted relatively early in the year. And so what truly are the budget implications moving forward? I do know that we have Lieutenant Backus with us. We also have Chief Green. So I'd be interested, Mr. Spatafor, if you would entertain me just for a minute, to have one of them speak to this and whether or not their department could even sustain the concept of this.
Sure. While we find Daryl Green and Chief Green and Lieutenant Backus, I have 2 hands up. So Dominic, if you could pull them into the meeting, please. We'll go with Councilmember Betts, and then we'll let Councilmember Jackson be the last word on this before we hear from the Chief and Lieutenant. Brandon, you first.
Oh, thank you, President Spatafor. I apologize. I was looking at the line item budget, believe it or not. I guess my question is, could we do some sort of budget chicanery where we add a section to the budget, some accounts to the budget specifically for our social workers, so it can be tracking that separately from wherever in this line item budget there is. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but it's just something that's kind of on my mind, because as I'm looking through the numbers, I mean, everybody's right here that we can't tell the mayor, or we can't tell the police chief to put money into, or money that is allocated to one of these accounts to a social worker directly. But could we make an account for the police budget that is specific to social workers. And that's not something we need to do this budget, but it's something that I'm thinking about as we move forward with this, because this is all just very confusing, because we're not talking about line items right now. We're talking about vacancies, which, you know, is a different sort of beast. So
Two things.
Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion, and kudos to Zoom's closed captioning for correctly identifying the word chicanery when you said it. So I think that's an open-ended question that you weren't necessarily looking for an answer for right now. Is that correct?
I mean, if the police chief could say something about it or something in the budget, if not, that's fine. We can talk about it in the future. It's just what's on my mind in this moment.
Very good. Okay, so I will close out with Councilmember Jackson and then Chief Green and Captain Backus. I think I was corrected. It's not Lieutenant.
Thank you. So no, I have not talked to Chief Green. I have talked to him in the past, and he has told everybody that he wants more officers. And of course he does. He's the police chief, and that's what he thinks. And he has expertise. I like Chief Green, but I don't expect him to come say anything less than that they have cause for action and all these things. But one thing I would point out is that the money we put in doesn't necessarily correlate to reduce crime rates. In fact, I don't think there is a correlation. Again, we're at the most we've ever spent, and we're at high crime rates. So there's that. But another thing that I think we're ignoring that we shouldn't is that there are people out there that are calling to action, asking that we really scrutinize our spending for Lansing police, and that we consider reallocating it towards things that deal with equity. So with that in mind, and knowing that there are these vacancies, and sure, and I guess I should have found the exact stats, but how many are we down right now? When was the last time it was full? And, you know, it's very unlikely that it's going to remain full like that. But either way, ideally, the social worker would help with the caseload, because they would take care of some things before it even happens. And two, we're not taking officers off the street. There's still going to be the same amount of officers. In fact, I would be willing to bet that some officers out there now will be gone before we even get new officers. So why would we increase the budget when it's our biggest expenditure and it's growing each year when we don't have to? That's my point. So it looks like we would still get our social worker, and there is a possibility to move that money somewhere, even if it's to a control account, which I don't think that's what the people necessarily want, is more of us controlling it. But it's probably better, because at least we can try to represent with what there are people out there and what they want. So again, I'm not saying defund the police, because that's not it at all. In fact, if the amendment goes through, we would increase the budget, and I would vote for it. Without it, I just don't think it's good faith effort, especially when the correlation isn't there. You know, I still do want to move it. I don't know if today's better or next week, but you know, it'd be good just to vote. And I would say one more thing. When we ask the mayor whether he supports it, you know, it's good to have the support, but that's not necessarily our, you know, call as far as whether we move forward with something or not. And that goes for any of the amendments. Thank you.
Okay, so you've moved it. Is there anyone who wants to discuss further before we vote on this issue? All right, we'll do. Councilmember Spitzley, it looks like you got your hand up.
I'm sorry. What are we voting on?
The resolution I have in front of me moves $22,015 out of the police operating into the police personnel line item. That's the budget resolution amendment. I don't see a commensurate reduction in personnel expenditures for any other thing. So it appears to just swap some money around in the budget. And then let me see if I've got I didn't see a. Councilmember Jackson, do you want to clarify? I mean, that's what I have in front of me is a resolution from the email from the 5th of May.
Yeah, I'll just add, since I have a feeling that it might not go anywhere, but I'll just add that the money that is saved from instead of having to fund the social worker, because we're funding it within the budget, I would say that any money left over move to the HRCS equity account.
Okay. Well, then I don't have that in front of me. I would maybe ask that you pull this then and work with Mr. Brewer to identify that, because right now all it does is swap some funds around in the police department budget. I personally, I'm going to just say I don't support it either way. I don't want you to do any work. I won't be voting for it. I think that we've already got funding for a social worker in the budget, and that's where I am. But I would, if I don't know where everyone else is. So if you want to bring it back next week with the commensurate reduction in personnel for HRCS funding, that would be great, because we don't have that right here.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion withdrawn.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Next, I see Councilmember Wood's hand.
I'll make this quick. I know we're into the council meeting at this point. What I'm asking for is for some information. It's my understanding in the that there was presented to the unions the vacancy factor, and it indicated that there were certain positions that were highlighted as being vacant for the upcoming year. It's been several years that we actually highlighted a particular position. We have been told over the years that this is an accumulation of dollars and positions rotate in and out of that. So I'd like to understand whether this is a proposal from the administration to have particular positions remain vacant. And if not, then I'd like to understand how this was interpreted for the union. So if I could get that information this week so that we have it for next Monday, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
And then in the interest of time, I will be proposing an amendment as well to the budget and policy to identify $20,000 to fund quarterly expungement clinics in the office of the city attorney to help folks clear their records so that they may access licensure and other thing and employment that may be hindered by those records. I have some language for you, but I'm gonna retool it just a little bit before I present it after hearing some feedback after it came from committee. So I will take a look at that, but I'll have it for you in writing next week. But just be on the lookout for that. I don't want to blindside you, but I will be looking at that as well. And I've spoken with the city attorney's office, and they're enthusiastic about the idea. At least Jim has expressed some interest in it as a good service that we can offer here in the city. So that is all I have for you all. Let me double check on the agenda. Anything else for the good of the whole and the committee of the whole? Okay, so it's 7:38, and when we adjourn, we will come back to city council at 7:50.